morning, everyone.
Hey, Lauren. It's super casual, so you know that's pretty much the intro.
Yeah, that's it, right? Yeah. So, Lauren Callahan, welcome. I appreciate you taking some time out on this wonderful Friday morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Matt. Hey, Tom.
How you doing?
Yeah, it's funny, Lauren. We typically have two recording sessions. There's like a night one and a morning one, right? And
yeah, I didn't get you guys on your late Thursday night, right?
So it's a little bit of a different vibe in the Thursday night ones, but it's actually fun because, and I don't know, we'll see today, but it seems that the right person got to the right slot. Totally by accident.
Matt's saying he's glad he's not hammered. When
yeah. Well, I do like the topic today, so because it's something I'm super close with, and I generally don't do any of that in an altered state. But like, you know, we had a guy who runs a psychedelic fund on, and it was a late night one, and I'm like, all right, this would have been awkward to have this conversation in the morning.
On Friday morning, yeah.
Like, you know, like you are definitely a better night guest than a day guest, right? Cool. So again, welcome. You know, let's kind of just jump right in. How do we get here? How do we, you know, give us your backstory?
Yeah.
Well, God, first I want to say, like, I just was so attracted just to the title of your podcast because I love it.
Oh, thanks.
Matt is in marketing, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Shout out to them.
Yeah.
You guys are like, we had nothing to do with that, but we thought it was cool, right?
It was totally Matt was like, yeah, no, we're doing this.
I really appreciate that. But I actually would like to just say in general, I think it was important because we can't have these conversations that we have without being honest out of the gate, right? Like it's got to be like, no, you're not coming here to talk about like, you know, buttoned up, you know, stuff. You're coming here to just talk about whatever we have to talk about. And like that is something I think is missing in the podcast ecosystem. A lot of people want to ask you these 10 questions and get this.
And it's so weird because the pitches we get are they're like, hey, I'd like to come on and talk about this. And these are, you know, my areas of expertise. And it's this small little lane. And a lot of it's not even like interesting. You're like, okay, so you're like, all right, so you and 10,000 other physical therapists do this exact same thing. Yeah. And it's not that we're like, no, it's not anti this. It's you just don't really have a topic. You don't have a story. There's not something to talk about. And I think the other thing Matt and I try to do is get somebody that's interesting, right? You know, like the story. The story of the person is almost more important than what you're doing. You know, that's like how you got there, and like as Matt asked, like how'd you get there, kind of thing, is kind of where we really figure out and put the pieces together of that, like that human piece of the whole thing. You know.
Yeah. Well, God, I love that. Well, I'm just like so happy that I made the cut. I feel like I must be an interesting person.
I landed an interview because I had a beard.
Yeah. So.
And I was like, all right, I got some of my looks are working for me, I guess. I don't know.
Right. So thanks for that. But yeah, let's get into it. Where talk to me.
Sure. So, so I'm an ultra runner and I'm an Ironman athlete, and I help people with their gut, and I do Reiki, things that don't seem to go together. And in my world, they go perfectly together.
I feel like everything you just said makes total sense to me.
I get it.
Like, yeah.
It might have made more sense on a Thursday night, but here we are on a Friday morning.
No, I've done Ironman.
We might have not made more sense on a Thursday night, though.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, definitely hard to talk about ultra running when you're, a couple in, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Well,
all right. So you do all this stuff. What got that particular cocktail together? Like,
So, I think one of the things that I love hearing from people is like when I tell people that, like one of the number one things I hear is, oh my God, I could never, run. I can never do ultras. I can never do an Ironman. Like I can barely run a mile. And I think I love for people to know, well, just like 8 years ago, that was me, right? I could barely walk a mile. And I think, I've authored 2 books now. And the first one in particular that I wrote, when people ask me like why you wrote it, it's because, when I would tell people, well, just like 8 years ago, I came back from Bangladesh. I lost my children. I had a half full suitcase and $500 to my name. And I was eating rotted carrot pie just to like stay alive. Right.
Cool.
Yeah. And I think people were like, oh, you should write a book. So, so I did, right. Just to kind of tell the story behind that. But that's where it started. Like, that's where it started, eating rotted carrot pie, having lost my children, like, truly like scrambling in midlife to build my life from the ground up. And fast forward, later, God, I found a lot of healing, became a healthy person, again, now I'm doing ultra events and helping other people be healthy and find healing. Right. So that is where it started for me.
So I got to dip my toe in here because you said lost your kids, and I'm kind of like, what does that mean?
That was a bomb right there. Yeah.
Like a custody situation, or like they're no longer with us kind of situation?
Yeah. She's smiling saying that.
Yeah. I'm like, you are awfully chipper for dead children. I hope to God that's not where this went. Like,
no. And, I'll fast forward really quickly and tell you, I like have a really great co-parenting relationship with my ex now. Okay.
Oh, perfect.
But back then it was like the most horrible divorce that you could possibly imagine, considering it involved 3 different countries. Okay.
Wow.
And this was a divorce that involved Bangladesh, Canada, and America. And, somebody who had $500 to her name and somebody else who was a little bit, on the other end of the spectrum. Right. So like, I basically took my kids from him. He took my kids from me. I didn't have them for a year and a half. Like, I mean, it was about the ugliest thing you could possibly imagine. So it was pretty terrible. And, so they, fast forward to that point, not fast forward, but, get to that point where, I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to repeat, an ugly divorce that I experienced when I was a kid, from my parents. I'm not going to repeat that. I'm not going to live in like this place of bitterness and anger and forever trying to heal from this trauma on top of like trauma that I experienced when I was a kid. Like, no, like fuck all that.
Yeah.
And so I really did just kind of like raise my hands and like surrender, and was like, waving that peace flag, I guess is what I'm getting at. And it was like, we have to do this differently. And I basically got murdered and run over at that point as I waved that peace flag. But again, like the steps were there. And many years later, I mean, God, you couldn't find a better co-parenting relationship. So, I do have my children now, and I will never like be that parent that's like, oh my God, I'm so aggravated. My kids are always that's like not a thing ever.
I really don't understand those parents either. Actually, I think I've said that 100 times on this show.
I might be one of those parents.
Yeah. So I'm
like, why are they assholes? Why are they assholes?
Yeah.
Why are they such assholes?
I have a 16-year-old who's essentially, if he had his way, would not be in our house at all. Not because he hates us, but because he's just like a 16-year-old boy and got that 16-year-old boy energy.
Yeah.
I'm on the other side going, please don't leave me, man. So I'm like soaking in every moment of that I possibly can. So I'm in the same spot you are from that perspective. Like, I'm just like all in on kids. I don't complain about them.
Yeah. Well, in full disclosure, so I'm remarried now. So I've got 2 co-parenting relationship things going on.
Wow.
And so what I said about, my ex and I being like this really beautiful co-parenting relationship, on the other end with, my husband, and like there's another co-parenting relationship involved. That has actually been like the most stressful, hellish thing in my life. And all I can say to that is like, man, do your own healing, right? And because you like can never change the other person. You can, it's a very different scenario, but dear God, like I love my husband, I love my kids, like my stepkids, I love them all, obviously, but so I don't know. You just got to do a lot of like internal work, because I have been there too as well, Tom. Like, what an asshole, right?
Yeah.
Like, that has not always gone so well.
But that's a tough journey for people, because like if you don't,
God, it is.
Like you can come and this is, I think, ties right back to the ultra thing, and I'm smirking a little bit because of my own personal experience. It totally different than yours, but like when I found ultra stuff, endurance sports in general, it was a journey that I found a spot. And now for me to actually look at other people who have not yet found that spot, it's actually a little hard to empathize with them because you've already done the work. You've already transitioned. You've already gotten to a new space. This show is actually, I think, the most shining example in my life. Once you have as many conversations as we have, and we're just getting going. Lauren, you're episode 99, by the way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Had you booked next week, you would have been 100 on the nose.
Yeah. You would have had a special prize.
So, but after having nearly 100 conversations, it's very hard to go backwards in time, isn't it? Like, you can't say like, I can, in order for me to have a conversation with somebody who hasn't made this journey or done that work, I have to either leave the conversation or pretend I don't know what I know in order to even have the conversation. Because otherwise you just look at them and you're like, you're just not seeing this clearly because you're not there yet. Right. Like,
but I feel that's a mark of when people can't have these conversations. I feel like maybe they're not committed to their own growth. Maybe they're not comfortable leaning into the uncomfortable thing. Right. I mean, like, when you're fighting for your kids, you don't give up. You know what I'm saying? So it's horrible. It's hell, but you're going to keep going. And I feel like, I'm not an endurance guy. I lean on the lifting side. But like, it's the same thing. This is hard. I don't want to do it, but no, I'm doing this. And you come out and you've polished the gem, as they say.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I've been asked before, what like mental toughness skills or whatever did you use to get through that time? And like there was none, right? Like that was pure survival and and survival and like obviously desire to get my children back, right? And then I mean, God, like you're kind of alluding to as well, even just with training both ends, endurance, lifting, like all of that. I mean, once you've been doing it a while too, like it may be tough, but it's so self-rewarding. Yeah. Right. Like you can't imagine a life without this.
You ask everybody else, like you're batshit fucking crazy. Don't be,
But man, like, look, how many things, Matt, in our lives could somebody say, like you mentioned, oh, I do this. And they're like, oh, why the fuck would you ever do
all
that?
All of them. Like literally all of them.
When I mentioned I did combo and I had to explain that I puked in a bucket in a stranger's house, they were like, why the fuck would you ever? Why would you? It was amazing afterwards. Yeah, and they're like, why? Why? So where's this frog from? The Amazon.
Yeah,
it's like the weirdest fucking conversation. But like, unless you've been through it, unless you've been initiated into it, you're not going to get it.
Well, and here's my thing with that question: why? I feel like when you're doing endurance sports or lifting or whatever you're doing, like
you don't have to include me, Lauren. It's okay.
Yeah.
I love lifting, by the way. I'm so freaking skinny, but I love it. And I'll tell you why, because I didn't start it until I was 40. So I never knew like the power of knowing that you could like pick up a barbell. Right. So like again, skinny as hell, but I do lift and like I absolutely love it. It's a powerful thing in my life.
Like I said, you don't have to conclude.
Yeah, Tom's used to being left out.
Circle time here.
Normally just sit in the back, say something witty, and then leave.
So, Lauren, let me ask you sort of a question where I just kind of think I might know the answer, but like before all this, before kid divorce battle, before ultra, before all that, like what was Lauren's life like then? Were you sort of like a rambunctious 30-something, smoking, drinking, kind of partying, or like what was that before? Because I am curious. I have a reason for asking, actually.
Yeah,
you were a social worker, right?
I was actually a therapist, but that was that was in the midst of this story. Actually, I didn't become a therapist. Long time ago, I got a social work degree, but I didn't do anything with it. I mean, sort of like it was a degree, but I didn't actually become a therapist until after I did get my children back. Like in the middle of that, like things got better, and I went back to school. Like once the dust, was settling, right? I did go back to school, and I became a therapist for a little while. But yeah, before that, no, my life was very different. Like I certainly didn't run. Athletics was not a thing. You would never find me on a podcast. You would find me like publishing a book and actually telling people about it. I grew up in The South. I actually don't know where you guys are. I'm in Louisiana.
Mobtown.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, like, I did grow up in the city, but I grew up in the South, very much like Bible Belt, and I'm like, I have no anything against whatever there, but I did grow up in a very like strict, Southern Baptist sort of culture, I guess.
Okay.
And I did gain a lot from that for sure. Like I'm thankful for a lot of that experience. That I was a very different person for sure. And it's not just about like the religious culture there. I mean, definitely the way I grew up, I was just very sheltered. Like when you talked about like being rambunctious, I might have been a rambunctious kid, but other than that, like, no, this was a part of like my trauma healing, and I talk about this in my first book, but when I look back and think of memories of my life, it's empty. Like, I mean, literally empty, like there are different kinds of PTSD, right? And I used to talk about this with my clients all the time. Like there's the PTSD where you look back and you have flashbacks to like certain memories, but then there's a PTSD of going back and there's nothing. Mm-hmm. Like there's no like
you've blocked it out, or
yes,
you don't have anything there to be
like nothing. Yeah, nothing happens. Like there were no connections, like nurturing. There was no I talk with my husband. He talks about all those like fun things and cool things that he did with people and stuff. And I'm like, I don't remember stuff like that. Like it
almost
happened,
like a lack of.
A lack. Yeah. It's like an abyss. Right. And what I would tell people all the time in therapy is that I'm not undermining, traumatic events, like by any means. Like I had them too, like there was sexual abuse and stuff like that. But what I'm getting at is that like, this is a special kind of trauma where there's nothing to pinpoint. Like there's nothing to say, oh, this happened. Yeah. It's like the lack of, I mean, think in terms of like emotional unavailability, like, emotional, just not there, like just emotional, not there. I'm trying to think of a better word for that. But that's a hard one, right? And because people will tell you, oh, nothing happened. Like my childhood was fine, or, whatever. But like people need nurturing, people need connection. Yeah. Like, sure. And when it just doesn't happen, there's trauma there, right?
Yeah. So yeah. This is like in Chinese medicine, East Asian medicine, we always talk about like there can be excess or deficiency.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter. It's either there too much or it's not there enough, and both can damage you in a very similar way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you think about like, they've done studies where, there are orphans that grow up in, very like dirty, but emotionally nurturing places where, the babies actually get like held, right. And, like skin to skin touching, right. And then the places where it's incredibly clean, but they don't get that, who thrives more? Well, the one, that was held and loved, right?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's a recursive theme. That's the other thing that's been fun about this project that we do here is that like you see the same lessons learned in 1,000 different ways.
And they seem to be in clusters too. Yeah, it's like we'll get 3 episodes in a row and you're like, you're the third guest to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is the universe telling me?
Well, it's actually a fascinating take on just the human condition in general, right? Like, no matter what we're talking about, whether we're talking about PTSD, psychedelics, red light on your junk, like orgasmic meditation, doesn't really matter. Like the lessons of
those
humanity,
were early episodes, by the way, Lauren. I don't think anyone's listening to those.
But the lessons are all the same as they are now, right? Like it's like human behavior, good human behavior is good human behavior that's nurturing, and that it's a growth mindset, to use an overused phrase. And shitty human behavior is the exact opposite. It's just shitty human behavior. And it doesn't matter how it is shitty or why it's shitty. It's still fucking shitty. And like when people look at, we've quoted the Blue Zone a million times, but the most impactful part of longevity had nothing to do with diet. It had everything to do with like sense of purpose, sense of community, sense of self in that ecosystem. Yeah. Right. It's it, period. Like, it doesn't matter which Blue Zone you're talking about. These guys eat rice. These guys eat yak. These guys eat vegetables.
These guys drink all the time. Yeah, these guys don't drink anything. Yeah.
Like, what you're saying about the lack of a connection, though, a memory, I got to tell you, that sounds terrifying. Like to look back on my life as a void, that feels very, very alarming.
Yeah. And I mean, that was, I mean, again, a huge part of my healing process. Like one of the forms of therapy that I really gravitated to when I was a therapist, and it's not just therapy, like I practice it now as well. It's more like a way of being, right? A way of relating to yourself. It's called IFS, Internal Family Systems. And it just is the idea that like that you are a self, right? That's like your state of consciousness, your spirit, yourself, like however, whatever is your essence is truly you. And then everybody has parts of them, right? Which is why you have a part of you that's like, let me go lift 1,000 pounds. And then a part of you is just like, no, fuck, I want to eat Cheetos today.
Yeah.
Like, so that's normal to have parts, right? And so in this practice, it's really just a very compassionate way of interacting from yourself to your parts. And so that's just the mild intro to, the
I've
short
done
version
parts therapy before. It's actually one of the most fascinating days of my life. Like,
yes. Okay.
I did a videotape session I was a remote coach, and I literally rented a conference room, and he was at the front of the conference room. There's about 12 chairs around the conference table. And he basically was like, let's just start here. And I started here. And I actually had a mind map in my brain that was literally sitting at different chairs around the table. And I would get up, I'd walk to the next one. He's like, what about that one over here? And some of them were masculine energies. Some of them were feminine energies. Yes. Some of them were asexual energies. Some of them were hypersexual energies. Some of them were hyper logical. It was super fascinating to do because you sound like a fucking lunatic doing it. You're like jumping. I
always have people come in like, am I crazy? Like, no, this is normal. This is normal.
Yeah. No, but it's fascinating that you do that. I didn't know that was some part of your journey. That's a really cool thing. I'd love to get somebody on here to talk about that actually, because it was a really neat experience.
Yeah, it's very depathologizing, right? Like you're not crazy that right, that you have these different parts, right? That's actually a very normal part of existence.
What's fascinating is when the two parts start talking to each other. I'm sure you've done this work too, where you're like, well, why is the type A spreadsheet lunatic who's like pinned out on caffeine and cocaine, like to get everything done? Why is this person so stressed out? And then like, that's talking to the artistic side of me that's saying like, because it's not right. And then I'm like, well, wait a minute. That's not really a problem. It's an unresolved conflict between a creative output and a outward perception of that output, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so I can talk just about that little point and resolve it. And then now the tension between those two sides got less.
Yeah. And you as a self, like, I don't know, maybe what was the perspective on that parts work? So there are different kinds of parts work. Sure. In the IFS world, the most healing thing you can do is for yourself to be not just in communication, but, communication and just compassionate interaction with that part, right? Like that is the most healing thing in the world. Like yourself knows how to heal, which I loved because as a therapist, I didn't have to be like, I know the answer. Try this coping skill. Sure. They're like, no, let's just get yourself interacting with this part. You'll know what to do. You got it. You'll bring that healing.
Yeah. And like a therapist would have had a hell of a time detangling that particular problem. Right. And especially got weird when it got to the CFO in my brain and every other part. Like the finance person was like, why do you feel like everything resolves around, why is comfort only defined in a fiduciary term rather than, anything else? And that was a whole issue that I had to have a talk with like 8 different parts of me to figure out. But like, there's no way a therapist would have gotten there. That's right.
But yourself knows, like yourself has the perspective to bring to your parts.
So anyway, I didn't want to sidetrack on parts.
I love it. I mean, I love IFS, right? Like that was a very, and still is like a really beautiful part of my own healing journey. And so I guess just to bring it back around, whenever I would do my own parts work, and I would just focus on a part of me that felt a certain way or experienced whatever. Like a lot of times it would just be empty darkness that would come up. Like, how do you pinpoint that? Right. But I mean, I guess, based on like, as we just said, like the self does know what to do with that. The self knows how to compassionately interact, even with an empty, dark space, right? That's still a part of
Lauren,
you.
Can I ask you a little bit about that? Cause that's an empty, dark space. Was it blocking something out, or was it just literally the complete void, lack of that component that you needed?
Yeah. So for me, and again, this would be different for somebody else, maybe that experiences something similar, but for me, it was actually both. So, I did actually block out some sexual trauma that I had until I was in my 40s, right? I'm 43 now. Okay. So like this was very, very recent. And it was kind of, it was always on the periphery for me. It's not like I didn't know that some of that happens, but trauma has a way of really like scrambling your memory. Like it is not a Rolodex of this and this and this. You know, trauma just completely like reorganizes that for you. So even though I remembered some of it, I didn't remember it. And basically like as I did my own healing work, I like came to remember some of it and to not just suck it up, like to deal with it, right? Like to address it head on, including like with the people in my life that were involved. And it went pretty badly, actually. Like I don't really have a connection with those people now. Like that was family.
Well, that's shocking.
Right.
But isn't that therapeutic in itself? You know, I mean, isn't that seriously removing the poison, if you will?
Yeah, exactly. Removing, the things in your life that are not for your highest good.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that. That's another theme, like getting rid of shit that doesn't serve you. I know we've heard that in a million different ways, but like there's some like legit ninja level logic to that statement, right? Like,
yes, there is, and that's one of the reasons that I love a Reiki practice, because it helps you to do that without sometimes even knowing what you're doing.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, like Tom, when you were asking, I mean, yes, so that darkness was blocking out some trauma, and it wasn't just sexual trauma. Like there was just a lot of anger. Like, I don't know. Some kids are just like more sensitive to that than others. But growing up in a very like angry home where it's just constantly like a hostile environment. So that is traumatic. That is complex trauma. Like a lot of people don't recognize that because again, that's one of those things that's hard to pinpoint. Oh, nothing happened, right? But that is not a loving, nurturing environment that people need, right? So there was a lot of blocking that out. But then there was also the element of just there was a lack, right? There was like deficiency. Sure, like I had everything taken care of, but as far as like emotional nurturing and connections, like there were not those times that I remember, a loving adult looking me in the eye, right? Eye contact is like huge for babies and kids, right? Like you as a child, like learn who you are through somebody else's face and through their eyes. And you learn that, you are loved and like matter in this world, right? And so, I look back and I don't remember like loving eye contact, right? Like I don't remember a lot of like loving, nurturing, like physical contact, right? Like those things weren't there, and just doing things, with other people, like family activities. Like I was actually alone quite a lot. So that is part of that darkness as well. And then, this is when I definitely go into my book. Like there's one specific memory. I got locked in a car in a parking lot while my caretaker went off and probably was gambling and drinking, I'm pretty sure. And so I just was left alone in this dark car at night. And so that actually, again, trauma memories, like they're not, this is exactly what happened. Like there's a part of my brain that takes that and just expands that into total darkness. Right. And so a lot of my healing journey was like going into that child, basically into that dark space and like bringing her out.
That's crazy. Yeah. It's funny because if you think about things that people are afraid of in the world, like dying, it's like, well, it's empty. It's nothing, right? Claustrophobia, it's tight. It's like, fear of the dark, a lot of kids and everything. So it's like to have your own story being told from that perspective is like just wild to hear. So you got into that. Where'd the Reiki come in? Was that sort of part of this journey, or was that sort of before this?
Actually, Reiki is much more recent for me. So I would say, that IFS, that type of therapy and practice in my life was hugely healing, especially with those traumas like that we just talked about. And then I stumbled upon gut health, and I bring that up because like that actually was really huge for healing a lot of depression that I experienced. I like little known fact for some, like serotonin, which is associated with your mood, is actually a gut metabolite, when I tested mine, like my serotonin in my gut was incredibly low. I've never wanted to take an antidepressant or anything like that. And actually an antidepressant totally messes up that process. So I encourage people to stay away from them. But when I healed my gut, that actually did really propel me forward, like past the place that therapy could get me, because it was just physiological. Like it was I was in a physiological uphill battle with my mood. And then later on, when I brought in Reiki, dear God, like I had no idea that a person could experience the kind of freedom from depression that I got simply by practicing Reiki. I had nothing to figure out.
Right.
Just receive it, right? Just receive it.
You know, one of my most favorite things about Reiki, and this is fucking nerdy. I'm sorry. So my wife is level 2. My mother-in-law is a master practitioner. I got certified in 1. The first character, Ki, is chi. It's energy, right? That's it's it's rice and vapor, the things we need to air and food to exist. But the word Ray in Chinese is Ling, and it's the coolest character in the world. I'm sorry, I'm nerding out over this.
I love this.
It's
okay.
So it's got 3 different parts, right? And the first part, they're shaman. They're 2 men bending over at an altar. They're praying. So the character for man is this, but the character's Wu in Chinese, and it's the pre-Taoist shaman, right? They sound a lot like Native American rituals when you read about that. And then above that is 3 offering bowls, right? There's these 3 little squares. Sometimes they say that's ko, mouth, but put in this order, they're offering bowls. So there's a ceremony going on to bring down the rain. So there's clouds and lightning above it, right? It's like you have this really, like, a lot of times we'll translate that to spirit, but it's not this kind of like, consciousness spirit. It's this, sometimes they'll even say magic, but it's this whole like natural order of like, hey, we're in tune with nature. And like, right, we translate it in Japanese as universal, universal energy is Reiki, So it's such a cool character, man.
That's so beautiful. I love it.
I don't know that many.
Well, when I tell people like what Reiki means, universal life force energy, that sounds so fucking bland, right? And you just in your spirit and everything else that, wow, that's so much deeper. And we're talking about total oneness with, life and their universal life force energy. That's so boring. So I love the illustration, the description.
When you start looking in Japanese, it would be the kanji, which are borrowed Chinese characters. There's so much in there. Even one of my other favorite ones is compassion. And it's a man in a box, literally a prisoner with the character for heart under it.
Oh,
right? I need to have compassion. Not I need to have compassion for the little bit. I need to have compassion for the assholes too. The criminals, right? And it's kind of this weird thing. I'm sorry, I'm going to go off on a tangent on the 4 Chinese characters I know.
Yeah. That's funny. So do you practice it on your clients or patients, Lauren, or do you just actively get it a lot? Are you? Yeah.
So when I first received it, I want to throw this in too, because I feel like it's important. I received it from a distance. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of people don't know that you can practice Reiki from a distance. You don't have to. Yeah. I mean, traditionally it's done in person with a practitioner, but I mean, it's energy. Universal life force energy does not know time and space in the same way that we do, right? So you can practice from a distance.
There's the theme. We did the scalar energy before.
We had a guy talking about scalar energy. Okay. And it was literally has a device that he gathers energy from the cosmos and creates a quantum field and puts your quantum signature, which is your photograph, into that field and does a remote session. Today I got nutrients and
I still got to email him my photos.
I got crystal healing today and nutrient absorption. So he's treating us for a year, and I was like, I would love to try this out. This sounds
so cool.
I was skeptical as a fucking acupuncturist. I was the skeptical one. But I gotta send him my stuff.
But isn't this this is kind of what we've been talking about, right? You getting Reiki remotely, this dude doing it through a quantum field. You guys are kind of saying the same thing, just you got different vocabulary to do it, different tools.
And different methodology. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
for
idea
sure.
is exactly the same. Like, it's like I'm connecting with you at an energetic level.
Yes, exactly.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And it's non-temporal, non-spatial.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like, that's how I originally received it. And now, I practice it on myself every day, and I do it from a distance with my clients, and I practice it on myself every day because like, I love it. And it's been such a source of profound healing in my life. And then also, God, like, I'm a Reiki master, I'm doing this on other people. And like, if you want to heal the world, you heal yourself first. Right.
Yeah,
so it's important to me.
Sister. Yeah. There's no truer words there, is there? I mean, it's like,
yeah, I think I missed it the other day and I felt really bad. Like,
yeah, but that's like kind of the problem with this space in general, right? You got a bunch of these douchebags out there trying to sell their thing to a bunch of other people when they're a fucking train wreck themselves. And you're like, well, how are you helping people? Like, this actually,
there is a great book called Wounded Healer, and it talks about that, right? Because the human condition, you're already flawed. You're messed up, but it doesn't mean you can't be of service to other people. And I it's funny, even with Reiki, like, I'm in a very soft medicine, let's call it. And there's a lot of people out there that are trying to sell something or do something that I think is absolute bullshit. And I think it's bad for people. I've never met a Reiki practitioner that seems like that. I've seen a couple that I think they think they're doing something, but they don't even see it, like, oh, that's nice. You think you're doing something. And then I've had some really kind of like, wow, that was kind of weird. Yeah, like, oh, not unpleasant, just I wasn't expecting that. And some really cool stuff. It's like, no, you're right. I do feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and when you said The Wounded Healer, which I haven't read, I've seen the book, but I haven't read it. But I think what that brought up for me is, one experience, like, when I had officially, progressed to being a Reiki master, right? So past level 1 and 2, and now I'm a Reiki master. And I didn't want to, I couldn't bring myself to like say that to identify as that. Right. And it was kind of that feeling like I was, God, like me, like there's a certain idea that goes along with that. Like, you should be, just fucking one with the world and like perfectly well, non-reactive and everything. And I'm not. And I remember, one day in particular, okay, so back to the co-parenting thing, the one that did not go so well for us, that person was mentioned. And so I was talking with my husband, and man, I got so triggered, like immediately it was like that nausea and, just the anger you feel like all through your body, like physical response, and, the pre-Reiki me, year ago, 5 years ago, whatever, my husband was like, "Are you okay?" And I would have reacted very differently. I would, it would have been something like, "I'm fine." And then the rest of the day, like, everybody's going to feel something if they're around me. Or I just would have gone off, and I would have explained it forever and defended myself and how I felt and all that, blah, blah, blah. But instead I just sat there and I stood there, and I remember I just said, "No, I'm not." And I started crying, and I let myself cry. And I just said, actually, this is how I feel about it. And I was like, this, and this. And none of it was very pretty. I mean, it was ugly the way I felt. Like, how the hell am I a Reiki master and feeling like hatred? Right. But here I am. And I was like, this is what I'm feeling right now.
Reiki master. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so, exactly. And so, like, I, basically release it, right, in a way that I probably would have never let myself release it before. And then it was gone. But I remember in that moment, my husband, he's awesome. He's amazing. And he just, held me while I cried. And I remember, thinking first, okay, how can I call myself a Reiki master? Right. But then my next thought was, I think this is what it's like to be enlightened. Where you experience something, like, it just comes, and then you can experience it without any sort of judgment, and then you just let it go.
But even that word is limited, right? Like, enlightenment, like, when you look at, like, not Tom, because he's going to have a tome to say about this, I'm sure.
Sorry, like, I'll shut up then.
No, I love it. No, that's not that's in an awesome way. He's got more experience than any of us on this, but
I don't think so.
If you take not Tom, enlighten is kind of like one of those like, well,
I'll show you some holes through my wall that might have been.
Yeah.
That I might have had something to do with.
Yeah. But like, if you ask somebody like, what's enlightened, you think of like a monk on a
a rock.
Like
mountaintop,
levitating with a staff, like,
which I'm not, right? Yes.
But like, that's the thing. Like, that's not, I think enlightenment is more like what you just said, right? I think enlightenment is more like, hey, I just have the fucking maturity and clarity of thought to let shit come through me that needs to come through me when it needs to come through me. Because if I don't, I'm creating a blockage, which is going to bite me in the ass somewhere else.
Yes. and trust too. I feel like that's a huge part of the enlightenment, if we're going to use that word. I feel like that's a huge part of it too, that you trust that what you are experiencing, like just trust it, like trust the experience and trust that you know what to do with it. Like, for example, okay, years ago, I remember, meeting a Buddhist monk, and I'm hearing about like how there are these levels and you talk to animals and nature. And I was just like, oh yeah. Okay. But now, like, it's not a thing for me to walk out into the forest. And if I just like sit there for a minute and breathe, and thoughts come to mind, and I may like just tell it to the trees within me. And sometimes like I hear an answer and I'm like, okay. And you just trust that there's no barrier there. Like this is possible. This is possible. I don't know that kind of communication or connection or whatever is possible, but it's there and you just trust it.
So the guy that did parts therapy, I don't think I've ever told Matt this story. Matt worked with him for about a year. I could afford a month. Did a month with him. And we put together some stuff, and I said, well, meditation's part of my daily routine. And he's like, oh, great. And we had this conversation. He goes, what are you trying to get out of it? I hope it's not any of that enlightenment bullshit. And this arguably is a person that has done more meditation than me, more internal work than me. And he was like, I think, especially here in the West, there's this idea that enlightenment is somehow putting you on this pedestal or making you better than other people. And I think it's making you more human.
Yes. I love that you said that. Oh my God, that's perfect. Yes.
And even I remember one, and I saw it on the bookshelf. I didn't buy it. It was first ecstasy and then laundry. Right. And like you like, oh, I'm going to find enlightenment, but then I got to get my chores done. Yeah. And I think there's, chop wood, carry water is a kind of a more classical way of saying that. Right. What do you do? There's a great book on a Taoist called Opening the Dragon's Gate. It's a weird Taoist sect. I guess I do have tomes to say about this.
Yeah. This is exactly what I was hoping for. Actually.
Yeah. I'm reading it up.
So Opening a Dragon's Gate, and it's actually one of the many reasons I ended up in acupuncture school. It just so happened to be in my parents' basement randomly. And I started reading it, and it was about like in a very kind of like, reincarnation kind of way. These two monks show up in a village and they see this kid and they go talk to the parents and they go, hey, we're going to put a bunch of shit out. And if this kid is the reincarnated, this guy, he's going to know what was his. And he passes it, and they take him out to the woods and they train him. They put him through all these cruel things so he can learn Taoism and control his energy. And, but at the end of the book, he gets ordained, he becomes enlightened. And then he goes back to the village, has a family, and gets a job. It's like, well, what the fuck happened there?
This is
where's the cloud? Why didn't the cloud come down and take him up to heaven?
Yeah.
Why didn't
Exactly
it's like, and he was still a practicing Taoist. He was still enlightened, but he was very much just another human,
just a dude.
I love how you put that about just becoming more human. Yeah. Sorry, Matt.
No. Meditation, I think, is one of the easiest examples of this in everyday life. Like, because, anybody who's meditated knows that it's fucking hard.
It's fucking hard as shit.
Right. Like, it's not an easy thing to do. And I think that the outside interpretation of meditation is that it's flawlessly easy, that you just sit there, legs crossed and humming and doing an om, and like shit's just going to happen. And I'm like, I meditate every day too. Fucking Tom and his goddamn streak is killing us all. But Tom's like at 2,100 days or something.
I'm like at like 2050 something right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I'm like, I just hit 130 today. So like,
Matt, I will tell you, man, you're doing 20 minutes. Some days I only record 5, and then I'm like, I'll do more later, even without the headband. But like some days it's like, this is all I got in me, you know?
But you know what, though? Like what I've learned, and I've been using it, I'm laughing because Tom's got this crazy streak. I've been meditating more or less consistently since about 2017. And it's exhausting. Like most times it's exhausting. And I can't tell you how many times I'm just sitting there going, it took me years to be able to say, it's totally cool if your grocery list keeps popping into your head while you're sitting here doing this.
That's like the practice. That's like I mean, we've talked about that leaning into discomfort. That's uncomfortable when you don't want to think.
Right.
You know, like it keeps creeping in and it's reoccurring. And Lauren, this is going to sound like a plug, but we're talking, we use these,
I'm curious. Yeah. Okay.
Muse headbands. They're such a fucking cool company. We had the co-founder on the show, and they partnered with, recently Aura, which is another like binaural beats sound wave program. So they talk to each other when you record it. And they also just recently partnered with the Monroe Institute, which is
some next level weird shit.
It is just weird as fuck.
Yeah.
There was like a leak that ended up on TikTok about some tapes that this Dr. Robert Monroe recorded for the CIA in the 70s. Yeah. And then next thing I know, I'm listening to these half-hour meditations where you have to like, you know, put your physical stuff in a box, and then you close the box, and then you chant, and then you know, but
it's audio
blew my
LSD
mind. It's so weird. And they're like, when you get to level 10, you're going to talk to the interdimensional beings, and you're like, okay,
oh man,
if you say wacky. So. And like, meanwhile, like if I say this dude worked for the CIA, you see a photo of him, you're like, yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
He's like a very like plain looking white dude. Like nondescript.
I am curious, actually. I'd love to get my Muse headband and go on a run, like not a huge run, but like maybe like a 8-10 mile run, because for me personally, and Lauren, I don't know if you've had the same experience running, but like that first mile's a throwaway. Like your brain's in a million different places. Your second mile's kind of also a throwaway, but a little less so. You know, you're kind of like the camera aperture is kind of coming into focus. I don't really start getting into a routine till at least mile 3, and even 3, 4, 5 is sort of like you're just sort of like getting through the mantle, if you will, that exterior shell. Like when it's not until I get to like 6 plus that my brain starts to kind of really open up, and like the boundaries are not like steel cages anymore. They're sort of a little bit more malleable, and I can start. I'd love to know what my brain waves look like.
Oh, well, that's an easy one to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know? I think I'm
going to be a sweaty ass headband, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love that you said that, because I've said this before, that for me running, like, especially if, I'm in like a clouded state of mind, right?
Sure.
That, yes, like my brain will be super busy for sure. But actually, I think that it's a really beautiful thing, because I feel like, you know, the act of running just opens the floodgates for things to start moving. Right. Mm-hmm. So to have your brain like totally busy, like that's fine, because it just was obviously stuck, right? And it just needs to get moving, and that is part of like creativity and, you know, clarity and all that. So that's really good. But I've always said that something about mile 7.5 that's when the problem gets solved for me. Yeah. Like that's when I'm like, oh,
regardless of
I know distance. What I need to. Yeah, something about mile 7.5, right? Like it's always around there. Then I'm like, oh yeah. And then like if I'm doing a really long run, like by the time I'm at mile 40 or something, it's like, wow, I'm fucking one with the world.
Yeah. And for me, that mile 18 in an Ironman is like where I become like, I've crossed over interdimensionally to a very bad place. And I'm like, I'm bearing witness to things that I didn't think existed and don't want to exist. And it takes me until like mile 24 24:25 in that same marathon to get my shit back together and be like, oh, I'm almost done. We got to pull it together.
Yeah.
You know, like,
and there's something about like the very last 2 miles of races for me that like I'll be within 2 miles or 1.5 mile of a race that's like 62 miles long or like 140 and it's like I'm ready to sit down and be like, fuck this, I'm done.
No,
only like 2 miles left to go. Like I've done that. I've been so close so many times.
I wonder if that's part of the human condition. I feel like that happens even with like projects I'm doing. I'm like, oh, I gotta write like 2 more things and then I'm done. And then I'm like, maybe tomorrow.
Maybe maybe never.
It's going to take me 20 minutes. Maybe tomorrow.
Some kind of self-sabotager.
Literally last night, it was so funny. We were talking about ADD with somebody we were watching on TV, and I was like, I made a joke. I'm like, I don't have ADD, and my daughter, who's 13, she goes, "How many projects do you have going on right now in this house?" I started fucking crying, laughing. I said,
called out.
I said, you know what's funny? You're totally right, and I was kidding, but. Funny enough, like that's how I manage my ADHD, right?
Oh,
like,
yes.
I keep 20 projects going on so that when I do run out of steam on something, I could like gently put it down and move to the next thing and like kind of scratch. And that's actually why I like triathlon so much. We don't have to go into it so much, but like triathlon is fun because it's like the ultimate
you're changing tasks.
Yeah, you know, like every time you're like, oh fuck swimming, I'm done with this nonsense. Oh great, I get to start riding a bike. This is perfect. Like
that's so true. It's so true.
Matt, not to get to your family involved, but like in my house, we identify the different kinds of ADHD we all have. So we all have it. I'm like, no, mine doesn't work like that. Don't do that to me.
Mine's totally different.
And this morning I'm scrolling through TikTok and I saw a comedian doing a joke. She goes, you know, when I found out I had ADHD, she goes, I was 17 and we were doing cocaine. And she's like, everyone else is like out of their minds. And I'm going, I can read now.
Yeah, I can.
And I thought, I was like, oh my God, that's the funniest thing in the world.
And my therapist years ago was like, asked me in a session, he's like, have you ever done cocaine? I'm like, yeah, I've done it a few times, but it doesn't really do anything for me. He goes, yeah, I could have predicted that. He's like, and I was like, why is that a thing? And then he explained it to me and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's right.
I had a he was University of Maryland surgeon tell me he drank 40 cups of coffee a day. And this was shortly after he told me he spends about 20 hours preparing a 45-minute lecture for class.
Oh, Jesus.
And I was like, you definitely, you should probably switch to something stronger than coffee.
Yeah. I'm not a therapist, but I have a guess here what's happening. Yeah.
I know I'm just a college sophomore, but I have a feeling.
So Lauren, I want to make sure we get to the couch to 5K thing because I'm
50K.
50K. Sorry. That's
couch to 50 miles, but
50 miles. Oh,
we won't split hairs.
Yeah. So
I went metric. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Which still fucks me up. Do you know how many times I've done a metric century? I'm like, I should know the answer to this question, but how many miles is that? 63. And I'm like, fuck, I always have to like hit Siri. What am I talking about here? You know, like, cause I just always fucking forget.
They do it with the plates at the gym too. I'm like, why are these in kilos?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's swimming, the whole meters and yards thing. Like, it's really confusing.
Oh, I know. And when I was a competitive swimmer back in my younger years, I was always like, you have to remember 2 sets of individual records. You're like, oh fuck, is this a metric? Is this a meters pool? And then long course, short course. It really fucks you up. There's like all these combinations. But like the ultra thing, man. So I'd asked a question earlier about what your previous life was like. And the reason I asked that is because almost without exception, and I'm certainly don't like to speak in absolutes, but almost without exception in my personal experience, people that are into ultra anything, Ironman, marathons, even as low as a marathon, and as high as 100. Those people,
I'm like, I might have ran 100 miles in my entire life, and I played sports in high school. I swam. I'm running now.
So it's so funny. The first Ironman I ever did, Lauren, and my first marathon was actually at my first Ironman.
It's sort of, but yes, kind of, sort of. Like, so I'm totally tracking with that.
Yeah. So this woman had this shirt that said "Marathons are cute," and I fucking like to this day giggle giggle every time I see that. Cause I'm like, yeah, she's a douchebag, but I love it. It's like perfect. That's amazing. Yeah. But almost without exception, people are, and I guess contextualize what I'm thinking with, but struggling to put words to it. Somebody said, well, what are you running from? And like, that was his first question back to me. He's like, I was like, at the time I had done, I think 3 or 4. And he's like, what are you running from? I'm like, what kind of question is that? Like, what do you mean? What am I running from?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's like perfect. And that is another one of the other reasons why I actually wrote that book. Cause people would be like, oh, 50 miles, you're living your best life. Oh, I'm like, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah,
wait, no, let me like paint the whole story. Like the only reason you're not running 50 miles is probably because you're not as neurotic as I am.
Sure.
Possibly trying to like heal from the same things that I am. Right. So yeah, you're exactly right.
And honestly, I don't know how to explain it. Maybe your book, maybe you have some enlightenment on this, not to overuse that word for today, but like, I don't feel as complete or stable in every measurable way than I do for the week or 2 after an Ironman. Like my brain, my body, my soul is completely in center, completely in balance.
Yeah.
Like everything is perfect.
Yeah.
And then that feeling starts to go away. And sometimes I think I've done it. So I've done 7 fulls, and
cool.
I think like I have a muscle memory for that feeling now, if that makes sense, right? Like, yes. So I can kind of artificially tease it along a little bit farther. But I mean, I'd be lying if I said I can get past like a month where I'm sort of like back to where I was. And, you know, I have other tools, I have meditation, et cetera, that keeps me from going ever back to the crazy side. But like, there's that feeling that I can't describe it. I can't get it any other way other than doing an Ironman.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, for me, I'd say that's a little bit more true on the running side. I do feel that with an Ironman. Interestingly though, I feel that a little more leading up to it when I'm training. Like there's something about that structure of training, that, and maybe like having that goal in mind that I tend to feel that for, but I mean, yeah, like I know exactly what you mean. But yeah, with ultra running in particular, there's just something about like running the really long distance, running into the night. Like the first time that I ran into the night, like, I mean, certainly there's a bit of fear that preceded that, right? Because I'd never, done that the first time. Like, what am I going to be like running in the woods by myself? I mean, essentially by yourself, because nobody's really around you, sure. Once you get to that distance in an ultra, what is that going to be like? And it was just like stepping into the most comfortable place. Like I felt so at home, right? And felt true, like I'm back to that alignment thing. Like, I felt truly like,
no, but because I do think the like, we talked about it a little bit with Reiki. It's not necessarily the thing you're doing. It's the state of mind. And that translates to other activities, right? We can get into that headspace, call it flow, call it whatever you want through various things. So it's not foreign to me. I think you guys are both nuts for doing it in that method, but like, that's like, even when you're like, around 7.5 miles. And I'm like, if I ran a mile a day for the next, would I feel the same thing?
Right. Yeah.
But no. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to side rail that. I really, I get that oneness sensation, but you get it from a lot of different things.
Well, and here's the new thing. Here's a little caveat for me too, is that like I run in the forest. I don't live in a neighborhood and I don't run on roads. And if I did, I probably would not be having this conversation with you, right? But the fact is I live right next to a national forest. And so when I go run,
pretty awesome.
I'm on a trail and I'm running with the trees. Like it's really beautiful. So it is the most like connecting experience. And so when I have been away from it, like if, for example, like just did something major and need to recover for a little bit. When I get back into it, it's just like, oh my God, I can breathe again, right? Like life feels correct again.
Yeah. Now, are you competing at like a professional level, or are you just sort of like a
Hell
really
no.
good hobbyist?
I'm proudly at this moment back of the packer. So yeah, like for me, just being able to do it, because again, I didn't get into this till like close to 40, right?
Sure.
And, part of my story is that I, wanted to run a marathon and tried for 4 years and couldn't do it, right? For like, I had all kinds of like injury and inflammation and recovery issues. Work to improve my gut health. And then like I went out and I ran a marathon, and then I started doing ultras, and then I did Ironmans, and I did a bunch in 1 year. Right. So, that's like why I'm really big into gut health. But, sorry, what was my point? What were we even talking about?
No, the couch. I just going into the couch thing. Cause like, I love that so I've seen we've seen couch to 5K, couch to, there's a bunch of them out there. And I guess there's only one way to say this, and I'm going to sound like a douchebag, but like, I don't care about couch too much because like I've done all those things. I've never done a 50-mile one yet. So I am curious about that. Actually, I don't have a frame of reference for that. I got a buddy who skipped over doing anything and went straight to a 100-mile race.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He did what is it? What's the 33-mile version? Is it a 40K?
50K would be like, what is that, 32 or 36?
Yeah, 32 or 33. He did that on a sort of because his boss did it, and he was like, all right, I'll go with you and do it. Yeah. But then like the next stop was like the 100-mile. Like it was like crazy. Yeah. So like there was no couch. It was sort of like, all right, I'm just doing this thing because my boss is doing it. And I love it because like I have that neurotic side of me that allows me to skip like having to frame it in any way other than just fucking do it. Like I remember my first Ironman coming out, going to the swim, you line up and everyone's kind of going into the water. Right. And like, I just remember not even just touching the water. The moment my foot went forward for the first time from listening to Eminem, you got to move it like that they're playing on the fucking PA system, right? The minute my foot went forward, I said, I can't stop. Doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't. And as soon as I hit the water, it was just, there was no difference. It was just like, we're just still doing the thing. And this was like a 100-yard walk, right? And I got out of the water. It wasn't like, oh, I finished the swim. It was like, no, I'm just continuing to put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, I love that.
And I just am going, but my wife and my kids all think I'm nuts. And they're like, listen, you can't expect us to do this because we're not nuts like you. And we don't have that. Like I need a softer on-ramp to this. And like, that's hard for me to like empathize with sometimes. Cause I'm like one of these guys. It's just like, oh, you want to do the thing? Then just do the thing.
No.
Yeah. Just go do it like now.
Yeah, like that's how you do it. You just actually do it. That's it.
Yeah, well, so the reason why I just thought that was so funny that you we're saying what you're saying is because, I mean, yes, like the natural order of things, you would do a 5K and then a 10K and then, half marathon. So I did do like lots of half marathons, but, I tried to do the marathon a million times and like couldn't do it. But when I signed up for my first Ironman, I still had not run a marathon yet. But I was like, I'm so close, right?
Yeah,
like so close. Surely. And when I signed up for my first half Ironman, I didn't even know how to swim. I was like, well, I can run a half marathon. I think I've biked that distance. I can learn how to swim. Oh fuck, there are time cutoffs. Like I didn't even know until after I signed up. I was like, oh shit. And then when I came in, the time cutoff for a half Ironman for the swim is 1 hour and 10 minutes, and I came in at 1 hour, 9 minutes, and 45 seconds. Oh, and I just remember being like, oh my God, like running to the bike. I was like, they haven't taken me out yet. They haven't taken me out. He's like, keep my gun.
That's exactly the right. But that's the mentality, though, that I think stops most people from doing these things, right? It's not the physicality. It's the mental aspect where you're like, oh, I instead of looking at it like I made it by 15 seconds, but I made it. Some people are like, I'm too fucking slow. I can't do this. I'm just going to stop. And I've seen that happen a million times.
Still, I've done I attempted one Ironman that I didn't finish, and then post and gut health and all that. Like I did finish 2 Ironmans, right? And, but even now, like I'm not fast and I'm still not a fast swimmer. Sure. And, I get in the pool to, go swim and there are other folks around, everybody's always got to explain like why they're slow, right? Like, oh, it's just an easy one today. Or like, I'm not feeling like everybody's got to explain from the get go, like, wow, they're slow. And I'm like, okay, great. And then they like are just doing laps, like literally, but they're lapping me. They're lapping me. Like they're way faster than me. And these are people that I've heard over and over again say, I couldn't ever do a full, like, and if you don't want to, then you don't want to. But to say you can't, I'm like, do you see how much faster than me you are? And I'm finishing it right. Again, if you don't want to, then you don't want to. But the whole thing about you can't, I'm like, I just feel like you could, like, if you wanted to compare us, like, you could see that you're probably a lot better than me.
Well, and that whole can't part is like so detrimental because like I informally coached a friend who was doing their first Ironman, and they're like, well, let me just do a half. And I looked at their training schedule that they'd gotten from some coach, and I was like, do you want my honest opinion here? This training schedule, you could do a full easily with this level of fitness. So like, if you're using this as like a lily pad, then I would either reduce your training load here, because like this is a lot of time to spend on what I know to be true about like the exertion level of a half.
Yeah.
So you either buy yourself some time back in your week or just fucking do the full, because like you're already there. I mean, you might as well just, it's $800 and another year of training if you want to do it twice. But I mean,
it's true.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't get that part, but that's a mental block. That's not
and I mean, I do get it because I lived most of my life in it, and when I did finally do my first 50 miler, and the progression was, I had never done a marathon. I went out and attempted an Ironman. I got to mile 137 and a half, and it was midnight, and they had to pull me. Fuck, I had 2.5 miles left, but I didn't quit. They had to pull me. So I was really proud of that. But you see how,
because of a time.
Yeah, it was like midnight or 12:30 or something.
Okay.
Like I was really it wasn't tough. There was a lot of hills. But I got so close again to running my first marathon and didn't do it. Right. So, but because I had gotten so close, I moved past it in my mind. I wasn't even interested in running a marathon anymore. I moved on to the 50 miler. Right.
Sure.
So when I did do a marathon, it was actually a training run. I went out to the woods. I was only supposed to do like 20, and I was like, I think today's the day I'm going to do marathon. Yeah. So I went in the 26. But what I was going to say was, when I did do my first 50 miler, which was also, I just went out into the woods. There was no race. I had attempted at a race and didn't finish. So I went back out in the woods by myself, told my husband, I was like, hey, I'm going to do this. And he was like, okay, cool. I'll call you when I'm out at work. and actually, that's a really good story. I should tell you more of that. But all that to say, when I walked out of the woods at 50 miles, I remember that was the first time in my life that this was not positive self-talk, mental toughness trick, like none of that. Like I just remember knowing, not even just thinking, but knowing to the core of my being, I can do anything.
Sure.
I can do anything. And I'd never known that before. I'd never felt it. And it's not something I had to tell myself anymore. Like I just knew it now. So I guess all that to say, like, yeah, like change your mindset, but also do the things that will help you know it to the core of your being.
But what you're saying, if I just sort of rephrase it a little bit, is that like you found, which by the way, kudos to you, because if I would have had that trajectory, I'm not sure I would have dove in for like round 2 to try it again. I'm
neurotic, right?
Yeah, like, but maybe I would have, but like driven. You kept doing the thing until you got. Like you were experimenting and you had the patience to experiment with that process, and like that's the part where I think that we just as a culture don't really foster at all anymore, right? Like it's like, oh, if it takes longer than my TikTok, that I'm looking, or my YouTube short, then it doesn't happen, right? And I'm exaggerating to prove a point here, but like so many people don't have that because we don't do anything culturally.
We don't cultivate that anymore either.
Yeah. Like, and my daughter right now is looking at going to an art high school, right? And she heard from a friend who goes there that there's a lot of homework. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? She's like, well, a lot of artwork, you have to do it at home. And I was like, now I have 2 degrees in art. So I my whole life knew this reality. I would go to school, get out of as many classes as I could to go to the arts school. And everyone at my school knew I was the guy that was going to be in art. So nobody pushed back too much. So I'd spend anywhere from 2 to 6 periods of my the later high school years in my art room. Then I would come home and I'd spend 5 to 8 hours on top of that, just drawing. Wow. And I would be doing that in between going to swim practice and all these other things that I did. but I never stopped doing it because I was like, this is what you do to do the thing. And when I got to art school, everybody did the same thing. That's how you got to art school.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I was I went from like the one lunatic who was spending all this time
to we're all lunatics. Yeah.
To we're all lunatics. And I'm like probably one of the lesser.
But that translates in any discipline though. You know, you have this natural affinity for it,
Correct.
whether it's music, whether it's dance, whether it's a sport. I'm going to do whatever it takes because I love this so much.
Well, and that's the part nobody knows how to do that. We've lost that vocabulary.
But here's the thing. I think on this call and on this whole podcast, we deal with outliers so much. We're not. We don't know. I don't think any of us want to just punch a clock and collect a paycheck. I mean, that sounds. God, I would have bullet in my head already. By now, like God, you're going to tell me I got to do this every day for the next 40 something years. But if it's something we want to do. Look, we'll let it kill us.
Yeah.
You know, I think it should be said though, that like that is true. Like there's that part of my personality that is very driven, and like if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it well, and like I just can't stop. Like I'm going to keep on trying. But part of this journey too for me was realizing the other side of that is that I needed to be good at this. I needed to succeed because that healed something for me that felt unworthy, felt like nobody, right? Remember that whole like nothingness, right? That was there for me. That was pervasive. That was internal as well. Like I feel like nothing, right? So I have to do this kind of thing so that I'm somebody and I'm something. But again, part of the healing journey for me was recognizing that and then saying, okay, that's cool. Like it doesn't mean like stop doing it, right? It's not like that's pathological and I need to find your self-worth somewhere else. I mean, like I do, but that's okay. Like you can recognize that kind of thing without judgment and just love that part of you that just needed to feel successful and just feel like somebody. And what that does is that on the day you're not successful, it makes it not so bad.
Sure.
You love the part of you that wants to be successful. You can also love the part of you that like is not successful, right? Like you can love all parts of you. So I want to throw that in, like part drivenness and part not drivenness.
No, you're totally right. And I would add to that says it's not that it's like when you fail at it or you don't have like a stellar day, it's not like, oh, that was bad. It was just like, it's just another step in the process.
Yeah.
Like it's no longer good or bad. It just is, right? It's just like, okay, just like that Ironman example, right? Like I'm just putting one foot in front of the other. That's it. Like it's not every step's different, right? Like,
and if it's a quote unquote failure, you can like, it is disappointing to a part of you, right? And you can like love and, be loving and compassionate toward that part of you that is disappointed. But then there's also that overall sense now, like you said, oh, it's really not that bad, right? It was just
a thing. Yeah. It's just, So the people that have been ingesting your book and the people you talk to about it, clients, I guess, or patients or however you describe them, but how has this been met with them? Like, are they the people that are similarly healing from trauma? Are they just avid exercise nuts? Like a little mix of both? Like, who are these people?
I'd say a definite mix, right? Like there's some people who just pick it up for the story. Some people who pick it up. They're on a healing journey. Some people pick it up. They're athletes, right? Like some people are, therapists that I used to work with. Like,
yeah, nice.
I'd say that everybody is at a different spot for sure.
And are you coaching them on running, or is this more of like a sort of a philosophical type experiment?
So the primary things that I do, like it's health coaching, right? And so the primary thing that I do is gut health and Reiki. I bring those things together, and it's self-care, and there's like a whole thing behind that. Actually, like it sounds sort of like a tack on like, oh, self-care, but actually with every single one of my clients, the people that have learned to get really good at being a little bit selfish, right? Which I always say being selfish is not selfish. It's one of the most selfless things that you can do for the world. But actually those people are the ones that find the deepest healing, like, in physically, emotionally, and mentally, right? So I do make it a pretty big priority in what I do.
That's awesome to hear. Cause like, I think it's almost every time we're kind of get to the end of people's stories that it's awesome to look at. You get somebody who started wherever they started. There was like this pivotal thing that moved them through something else. And the new spot that they're at is able to sort of realize that reality is redundant and that other people have similar things that, you can start to draw, the universe will draw those people to find you kind of thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Lauren, I can't tell you how excited I was to have you here today. I thank you so much for.
Thank you. I love this. You guys are so fun to talk to.
Sometimes Matt and I'll log in and he's like, was this one of yours or one of mine?
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, what's her story? And I'm like, oh, you'll like her.
Yeah.
She runs crazy stuff. You'll like her.
And then today it was, where is she?
Yeah. Well,
look, it all worked out. It was a perfect conversation. Fine, we got some work done. We're not upset.
Yeah, everything was cool. But I do think it's fun. It's like Christmas, you never know what you're going to get. And that's been like kind of one of the other things. Like sometimes I'll like go as far as look up like a LinkedIn profile or something beforehand or something. But it always is nicer to kind of get it as you meet them, because that's what humans do, right? We don't know.
It's so funny when I do some podcasts, they're like, we need to do a pre-interview.
Like, why?
And I'm like, but you don't want this to be spontaneous? You don't want this to be...
I know to talk about it ahead of time. Do I tell you the whole story now? I was going to say, like, it's the time, like, it's the same on the other end of, like, guesting on a podcast. Like, even when you first started and you're like, hello, like, I was waiting. You just, like, never know. Like,
question one.
Yeah, right. Well, they don't even look at you. They're like, they got the paper over here. They're like, so it says here, and it's like that I don't think you have the right bio.
Yeah,
that's
you looked
not
up
me.
a different Tom.
That is not me.
Yeah, he's an accountant. No, but like as humans, like I'm a user experience guy for a couple decades now. So like I look at how people interact with things like tools. It does. Technology in particular, but it's just like a lens of looking at humanity. Like when you meet somebody for the first time, like you don't have their LinkedIn profile, their Instagram profile, their TikTok, like you don't know anything about them for the most part. And even if you like are talking to a speaker at a conference you're at, you meet them afterwards, the only frame of reference you have is whatever
they just presented.
Like, and so you might have that as a genesis block, but past that, you're just two humans trying to work it out. Right. Like, and that's what I think makes a better conversation, especially for your kind of story, Lauren. I mean, there's just so many ways that could have gone and like, you just let it go where it goes.
Yeah. Well, I love talking with you guys. This was really great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having. So tell us where to send people, where do people find you, all that neat stuff.
Yeah. So my website is goddesshealth.org.
Okay.
And that's where you can find my latest book, which we didn't talk about, Powerful and Not Tired, which is all about gut health, Reiki, and self-care.
We'll have you back on.
Yeah, to have to talk about that.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So goddesshealth.org. That's it.
Goddesshealth.org. Cool. Are you a social person? Like, are we sending anybody to Instagrams or anything like that or no?
Oh, so I'm technically on it. Me and social media, we have a very off and on relationship. It's
She's
mostly
almost a
off
Gen Xer, Matt. She's almost a Gen Xer.
1981, right? Like I'm totally on the edge
on the
there.
Other side.
And that's how I feel with social.
We were told we were Zennials.
Yeah. I know.
I'm 76. I'm decidedly an Xer. I would say.
I don't know. I think I think the cutoff is we're not adverse to technology. We just weren't born with it.
Yeah. Well, that definitely summarizes my entire life.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, I maintain like an Instagram profile so that if somebody goes to look me up, they like have something to find. But I really don't engage. Yeah, I don't engage. So I'm super curious really quick, totally off topic, but Matt, do you have any runs coming up or Ironmans coming up? Or?
So my last big race was Maryland Ironman in October of 2019, and I was set to do Placid in July, I think, of 2020, and obviously So what I did instead in 2020 is I ran 6 virtual marathons that year. And so,
very cool.
Because it was actually. Hold on. You're going to laugh. I have it right here. My kids got me this for Christmas in 21, but I did my 20th marathon in 2020.
Awesome.
And so they got me this trophy 20 in 2020. And I thought it was the coolest thing. So the 6 was because I was only at 14 and I was like, well, all right, I got 365 days to get this shit done.
Okay.
And it was less because obviously we didn't start, I don't know when you closed down in Louisiana, but here we didn't close down until
February,
the end of March.
March.
One of my favorite t-shirts from a race ever is the first virtual I did, was just called the Bigfoot Marathon. And it was like the ultimate social media high, or the ultimate social distancer, and it was just it was funny. But, so I honestly have had a real like love-hate relationship with running since COVID, because I used to do my shtick was I do one Ironman a year, usually 1 to 2 marathons, and as many centuries and Olympics as I could do. I never did a half. I never did a sprint. I never, so it was really just the big races, and I'd usually do a couple a year. My training protocol, by the way, is not anything like I'm a science over like what the internet tells me thing. I run Galloway so I do a 3:30 cadence, and I do that from the first 3.5 minutes into a marathon to the very last, regardless of where I'm at. I'm super disciplined about it, but it also means I don't have to do these like 40-mile runs and like all this shit. Like my training at peak for an Ironman is maybe 18 hours in a week. And most of that is like the one bike ride I did, like the long ride.
I don't really do any more than that either.
But I do all my bike training at a spin class, right? Like, so it's like that's not, and because it's just high interval training, and I just, anyway, but, I got out of it and I just kept gaining a couple pounds here and a couple pounds there. And I'd go out on runs, and it was like, I would get back into it after one run, and I'm like, but I haven't put a big race on. So finally a friend of mine said, I'm doing something in California, Seaside half Ironman or whatever. It's in April. And I'm like, I can run a half like untrained. So worst case scenario, I just fly out to California with my bike box and my bag and just kind of gut it out. But I am trying to train for it, though, a little bit, just because I love that energy, man. There's nothing cooler to me than a triathlon. Like the energy there is
very infectious.
It's infectious, man. I mean, not the leather-faced, wrinkled, tan till they're dead, people on a $12,000 tri-bike. Not necessarily that kind of energy. Only race I ever podiumed at was one, and the guy who beat me, I took second. The guy who beat me, I mean, he was like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. His skin was just like weathered, like, I'm like, yeah, if that's what it takes to podium at this otherwise irrelevant race, I'm not willing to do that.
Oh my God. What a different experience I had. Like when I finished my first one and that last mile, I was like neck and neck with this lady who she was 80.
Oh my God.
So I'm running alongside of her, and I was just like, so cool.
Yeah.
And then I was like, wait. And then next to her, and I'm like, wait. Shit.
Well, I think that's the funniest thing though about that. They put your age on your calf, and I, as I'm, in aero position, like riding, mile 70 on a bike or whatever, you look past you, and the only people blowing past me are like 65-year-olds. Like they're just passing me like I'm stopped.
I wonder if it's because they're the only ones with enough time to train constantly.
They've been doing it forever.
Yeah.
Well, okay. By the way, they don't put your age on. They don't put your age on your calf anymore. Post COVID, they don't touch you.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. So I'm the nerd who's got the pack of number tattoos like that in my bag, and I just pull it out and tattoo my arms.
Look at you.
And I do it on my age too. But what is funny about that is the only people I pass are people with ages starting at 20. And so I asked an exercise physiologist about this, and they said your slow twitch muscles don't really develop until you're in your 30s, like really like late, like compared to your fast twitch muscles. So when you're 20, you can blow past the pack on those, a sprint or an Olympic, you can crush it. But even at the Olympic distance, by the time you get to that halfway through the bike, if you've seen the matchstick metaphor before, right? Like every time you do a quick burst, you burn another match, and your body has so many matches in its pack. Yeah. Well, these 20-year-olds will come out of the swim just burning matches. And then they get to the bike and they're like, okay, but they're still burning matches, and then they're walking most of them because they're just gassed. Like they're just out of it. And all the 50-year-olds are laughing at that guy because they're like, I'll see you on the bike.
I still have matches left.
Yeah, I'll see you later. And then like, again, the 65-year-olds, I got to the end of my first one and the fucking guy next to me, like at dinner, he's like showered, like in a new outfit on his like second, third bottle of wine. And I'm like literally just finishing. I'm like, how long ago did you finish this fucking thing? Like, what the hell is going on? So I don't know. We'll see. I'm getting back into it slowly, but
cool. Very cool.
But anyway, you have anything coming up? You said you just finished.
I do. I just did I did 100K up in Vermont, which was super cool a few weeks ago. And then I have an Ironman in Chattanooga at the end of September.
You're doing Chattanooga?
I am.
Oh, that's funny. I used to know the race director for that race.
Oh, yeah. That's
he
a super
and I
cool
were
one.
in my very first Ironman experience. He was actually our swimmer in a relay, and I did the bike, and he ended up going to run that race.
Very cool. That's awesome.
It's funny.
Yeah, that's
Chattanooga's on my list. Actually, I did Beach to Battleship 5 times. That was most of the ones that I did. And MDOT bought that specifically because it was competing with Chattanooga and Louisville, and they closed the race permanently at 6 a.m. the morning after the race.
No kidding.
Yeah, it became Ironman North Carolina for one race.
And
I think they still do the half there, but not the full because Chattanooga was getting cannibalized because this was a non-MDOT race. So anyway, Tom, we'll let you off the hook here. Let's wrap this guy up.
As you can tell, I'm fully enjoying this conversation.
Yeah, stop it. All right, guys. Thank you so much again. Lauren, we'll have you back with the next book. Thanks again for sharing time.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys.
You bet.
Bye.
Take care.
Be subversive, irreverent.
Health is wealth, but you knew that.
Everybody knows that.
But so is following us on social media at Irreverent Health. And check out our website for more exclusive content at irreverenthealth.com.
Oh, I like this.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Irreverent Health.